Yes, hello everybody. This is Murat Durak speaking, Chairman of Turkish Wind Energy Association, but we are still accepting the people. I think so far we have like nearly 300 people. And nobody, I hope, waiting in the lobby. Yeah. So just let me wait 1 minute, then we are going to start. Dear Mark is here? I think no. Mark Laban here?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, still the people are like flocking here. So more than 300 people already. Yeah. So it's good that people really interested in offshore wind power in Turkey. That's nice. Yeah. Oh, yeah, already 320 participants. Yeah. It's already six minutes. Dear Yasemin, if you want, let's start. If you agree.
Yes, sure.
Yes.
Murat Bey.
Yeah. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and dear children, maybe and all lover of offshore wind power. Thank you very much that you are accepting our invitation and came here. You know, the aim of the today's meeting is online meeting is say consultation about offshore wind development roadmap for Turkey. You know that our country had a great success story on renewable energy and wind power in particular. We have already 12 gigawatt in capacity, I mean under operation, 9 gigawatt solar, and more than 22 gigawatt hydro. So that means nearly half of the energy consuming in our country is from renewables. But when we think about offshore wind farms, okay, they started some 20 years ago in Denmark and now all through world. But for Turkey, I always say that for part of our country is surrounded by seas and windy waters. And we have very well established marine construction sector, very well established shipyard sector, and very well established industry, and very well established wind power onshore industry. So for us, it's not difficult to convert these know-how, these people force, these people will to offshore wind power. And I am thankful that, first of all, to our Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, they are always supported renewable energy. And recently, you all know that they had a strong political commitment to till 2035, 5 gigawatts. And it really helped us that to discuss with the international investors, international people. So today, the roadmap is, of course, prepared by World Bank. My special thanks to Mrs. Yasemin Orucu and Mark Laban, and also they always support my association as well. I am really grateful to them. And of course, from COVI, dear Eric Moore, he was hard worker on this report. So I'm really thankful to them. And also I'm thankful to all people who are attended in just 2 or 3 days before we just published this. So I think, dear Yasemin, it's a World Bank record. It should be. How many people now? Still people are entering. So again, thank you very much for all the participants and World Bank, Ministry of Energy, and COVI, dear Eric. Now, I don't want to take your time long. Dear Yasemin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Murat Bey. I would like to welcome everyone. As Murat Bey mentioned, we wanted to initiate industry consultation with this meeting to finalize Turkey's offshore wind roadmap, on which we have been working with the government and also other stakeholders, as many of you know, for over 2 years. This has been an exciting journey for us, and we welcome at the end, basically, well, at the end for this report, basically, but we welcome Turkey's recently announced 5 gigawatt targets by 2035. This is a big step in communicating clear installation targets in line with the preferred growth scenarios of the government. We also run scenarios in our roadmap, and in our scenarios, the period between 2022 and 30 will be crucial to create a momentum in offshore wind development in Turkey by commissioning first offshore wind farm projects. As you might know, this project, Offshore Wind Roadmap Development Project, is a part of a larger effort on offshore wind put forward by World Bank's ESMAP team, Energy Sector Technical Assistance program. The World Bank Group has been working in several emerging economies and markets in other countries as well since the program was announced. And to date, I think it has been 6 roadmaps announced, and all of these, I must say, are very surprising to these countries, because this is actually really revealing the unprecedented potential for offshore wind globally, and not to date, as you know. To date, it was mostly for Europe and China, but this is now set to expand to other countries. So with this, I think we are, as World Bank, attempting to provide strategic analysis and advice to government on Turkey. And this is really trying to explain the ways to reach Turkey's aspirations in offshore wind, and it's more like a how to reach study to these aspirations. You will hear more on the details of the roadmap in a minute. Eric will be sharing a presentation with you, and you can share your comments in email form with us after this meeting, and you will be able to get the presentation as well. I think in Turkey going forward, managing risks, costs, and also cost of finance will be key parameters in realizing the aspirations for offshore wind. To help on the process, World Bank will be supporting Turkey with another project, which will be de-risking 3 offshore wind sites in Marmara Sea. And there are 3 focus areas for this technical assistance. I think this is over 9 million euros of budget and set to initiate within this year. World Bank will be providing support to a high-level environmental and social constraints analysis, looking deeper than what we have done in the World Bank roadmap reports on the environmental social issues. Looking at also, as the second focus area, offshore wind energy site development study needs, especially by carrying out meteorological oceanographic analysis and also some measurements, and looking at conducting geological, geophysical, and geotechnical surveys. And the third component under this technical assistance will be looking at technical, legislative, and economic aspects of development of offshore wind in these 3 sites, and also building capacity in the government, but also helping private sector to be in the discussion. So with this, I think I can say we will continue to support Turkey on renewable energy development as we did in the past. World Bank project started for renewable energy in 2004, and we will be focusing particularly on offshore wind being a strategic technology for Turkey, providing reliable energy in proximity to demand centers, but also with potential to provide new jobs and business. With this, I would like to thank each one of you for your contributions and interest and being here. And I'll pass the floor to Eric to make the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. I will then switch to the presentation. I just need to present the screen first. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this webinar. This is the Offshore Wind Development Roadmap for Turkey. It is led by our colleague Maya Lehmann together with Yasmin and Kovi from my end. The webinar agenda today will be, we will display the project team, the project aim and the status, the scope of the Offshore Wind Roadmap, a summary of our findings. Then we will go in to discuss a little bit about supply and demand and talk about the drivers that are important for offshore wind. We will then take a look at the potential development areas in Turkey that we have analyzed within this study, and then talk about the 2 different growth scenarios in brief that we have developed. We will then take a look also at our views of what should happen or can happen in regulation and policies in order to facilitate offshore wind, and then take a short glimpse at what we expect as levelized cost of energy within Turkey. So the project team is the following. The World Bank has been driving forward the development of the offshore wind roadmap for Turkey and has appointed Kovi to execute this project. Kovi has closely collaborated with local consultants and specialized advisors like the biodiversity consultancy company, Reconsult, and GasDay in order to execute a very highly detailed project report on this roadmap. What is the project aim and the status of the report? The purpose was to independently evaluate the potential of the Turkish offshore wind market and its capacity to support the growth of an offshore wind industry, to provide the Turkish government with an insight into the challenges and opportunities of developing the offshore wind sector, and to create a practical roadmap to help guide policy-making decisions. In the end, the target is to produce a roadmap report that is relevant and informative to a wide range of stakeholders interested in Turkey's green transition. What is the status? The Kovi roadmap report is largely complete. The government consultation phase on the report has been completed, and we are now in the final iteration of the report, incorporating feedback received on this webinar, which is to be issued then as a full final report during Q1 2023. So let's talk about why offshore wind. Offshore wind is a rapidly maturing industry, and it has experienced a tenfold global growth in the past 10 years, going from 5 gigawatts in 2012 to 57 gigawatts in 2022. It's a resource close to coastal demand centers, which is especially interesting for countries like Turkey. It has a potential for high output and lower variability, well suited to display coastal coal generation. It also avoids land constraints and using land areas. But especially it's a new industry that creates and supports skilled jobs and boosts inward investment. Especially interesting for Turkey's regional supply, a cooperation opportunity because the EU is targeting offshore, of which 50 to 100 gigawatt could be placed in the Mediterranean Sea. It is also cost competitive local labor for long-term operations and maintenance. So what is the roadmap scope? The scope covers a broad range of topics where we have explored grid and ports infrastructure, supply chain, downstream studies, and taken a look also at health and safety matters. But on this report, we will focus on the electricity supply and demand, on which are the drivers for offshore wind, take a look at the potential development areas, talk about regulation and frameworks and what needs to happen there, then discuss potential growth scenarios from the view of COVI and the World Bank, and then take a look at levelized cost of energy. Here are the summary of our findings. We have identified several challenges. First, there is a large capacity for expansion of solar and onshore wind energy at a lower cost. Also, Turkey presents low to moderate offshore wind speeds for which turbine technology is not yet fully optimized. Local content expectations also within offshore wind must be finely tuned. And finally, all sites suitable for bottom-fixed wind farms are currently in restriction zones, which are areas of high environmental and social sensitivity. However, there are large opportunities which we have identified. There is a large amount of potential power generation located near demand centers in Turkey. Also, there is already a successful existing onshore wind and maritime supply chain in Turkey from which the offshore wind industry can tap on. There is additionally floating foundations which present a massive export opportunity to the EU and broader Asia. Additionally, there's a high-profile opportunity to implement the lessons learned from the 2018 YEKA tender. So let's take a look at the electricity and supply and demand. The Turkey Energy Outlook projects that national electricity usage will increase in the coming years. To offset the increased demand, supply of electricity needs to grow significantly. Demand projections from the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources for 2020-40 show within a reference scenario that an annual growth rate will be around 3% and therefore 100% increase in 2040 compared to 2020. But what are the drivers for offshore wind in Turkey? Well, Turkey's CO2 emissions have been increasing rapidly from 100 million tons of CO2 emissions in 1980 to up to 400 million tons in 2020. This comes because electricity and heat generation are the main contributors to the emissions. Fortunately, the Turkish government has targets of increasing capacity of wind and solar through the national INDCs. What does this mean more in detail? Well, Turkey is aiming to increase electricity generation from wind power. And right now, the national goal of 30 gigawatts from wind power in 2035 is fantastic. On this, offshore wind is being targeted to provide 5 gigawatts by 2035, which is an important contribution in order to achieve the long-term goals. But what are the locational and economic benefits for Turkey? Our supply chain assessment has showed large benefits for an offshore industry in Turkey. The highlights of these are that companies in parallel sectors can enter the offshore market with low barriers to investments. Also, our analysis on operation and maintenance shows that this is especially beneficial for the Turkish industry and with low investment risks, where this presents a good opportunity and large opportunity for the Turkish workforce. Additionally, Turkey can tap into the existing onshore supply chain and develop an offshore supply chain for itself. But not only that, it can also serve the Mediterranean and the Black Sea regions. because the EU is targeting 300 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050 also, of which 50 to 100 gigawatts could be in the Mediterranean Sea. Therefore, Turkey could feed into this neighboring industry. The target is then not to think only as Turkey industry for the country itself, but interregionally across a broader landscape. The materials and labor in Turkey is competitive and can support the supply of relevant components like blades, jackets, and floating structures, also to EU projects. How did we take a look at this with regards to analyzing the areas that are available in Turkey for generating an offshore wind industry? First, we took a look at the wind speed resources. And then by combining the data sets on wind speed, environmental, social, and technical constraints, it becomes clear that there are limited areas for fixed offshore wind. However, much greater potential for floating offshore wind. The maps below show progressively the available wind resources with exclusion and restriction zones, and then the potential fixed and floating offshore wind resources on the right side. We can take again a look at the map, and we can see that good wind resources can be mainly found on the western side of Turkey, the Marmara Sea, and in a coastal near area on the Black Sea as well. Exclusion and restriction zones have been considered as filters, as initial screenings that the World Bank has been performed in order to combine this with the wind speeds and identify the remaining areas that are both suitable in terms of providing good and promising wind resources, but also showing that there are no further social and environmental constraints. It's important to note that this is a very high-level exercise at the moment, and which therefore then needs to be finer tuned specifically on each site that is of interest. So let's talk also, since there are so many restriction zones in our maps, what does this mean? We have separated exclusion zones from restriction zones. The exclusion zones represent no-go areas which cannot be used for offshore wind based on our first initial screening, because they are protected areas and internationally recognized areas which shall not be used for offshore wind. For example, also cultural heritage areas or airports or military exercise areas are definitely clear exclusion zones, and therefore we have discarded them. However, there are also restriction zones, which represent designated areas with important ecosystem functions and species, but could host offshore wind developments following further investigations. What is the result of all of this analysis in terms of constraints mapping? Well, the combination of data sets on wind speed, environmental and social constraints and bathymetry shows sparse suitable areas, as we have mentioned, for bottom fixed offshore wind, but definitely a large area still available for floating offshore. This is now concentrated in 4 areas. Area 1 in the Black Sea, Area 2 in the Marmara Sea, Area 3 west of Çanakkale, and Area 4 near Ayvalık. The further benefit of this is that we have seen that fortunately the available areas for offshore wind are very close to high load demand centers like it is on Istanbul for Black Sea and Marmara, and like it would be potentially for Izmir if the development happens in Çanakkale and Ayvalık. Here are some key numbers of the development areas that we have derived. The 4 areas that we have discussed can serve Istanbul and Izmir, and these 4 areas provide different ranges of gigawatts divided into floating potential and fixed potential. The key message here is that the 5 gigawatts of offshore wind expected by 2035 can already be served in theory by fixed potential. But this is much more massive when you take a look at the floating potential, which reaches 46 gigawatts on the first look. This we now need to take into account into a growth scenario. We need to think of how can this evolve over time. We therefore took a look at the industry evolving from now up until 2030, then 2040 and 2050, and how this could mean an exponential growth in terms of bottom fixed and floating offshore wind. The separation of the 2 low growth versus high growth scenarios happens because we separate the sizes of the operational capacity, of course. But additionally, we take a look at the number of ports which would need to be upgraded if you want to go from a low growth scenario where there is a lower total operational capacity to a high growth scenario where we assume that Turkey will fastly ramp up the industry's outroll. This also hits, of course, the transmission system, because if you take a look at a scenario from a high growth perspective, it means that a larger number of transmission lines may need to be upgraded, and we have highlighted this also within the report. Furthermore, and most importantly, the local content requirements need to be adjusted, because it doesn't happen or help if you solve the technical matters if the regulatory matters are not also following to the solution of the problem. The analysis that we have performed has been performed both for bottom fixed and floating offshore wind for the two scenarios of low growth and high growth. And as I have discussed before, this is a first view of what the World Bank could present, and of course can be further increased, as we have seen now, by the targets of the Turkish government. Here are further metrics that we have derived from the growth scenarios. The growth of an offshore wind industry, as mentioned, can be separated into a low growth perspective and a high growth perspective. Here we have taken a look at what could happen already by 2030. Offshore wind could generate 100,000 full-time equivalent jobs due to direct and indirect employment. It can also have a very positive and beneficial impact on the gross domestic product, reaching almost $16 billion, either direct investment or indirect investment on the offshore wind industry. We have also derived what this means for the levelized cost of energy, where we see a wider span ranging from $74 per megawatt hour to $140, dependent on the wind resource and assuming a weighted average cost of capital of 6%. Here, we need to take into account that it will depend especially on where the wind farms are developed in Turkey, because the wind resource may be higher on some areas and lower on the others, and this directly impacts the levelized cost of energy. Another benefit of offshore wind will be the strong annual CO2 reduction that comes with it, reaching from 100,000 tons of CO2 on a low growth scenario to up of 340,000 tons of CO2 emissions that can be saved, depending again on which area is selected as a wind resource area. Again, on the low growth and high growth, we can only achieve this if we either develop only a certain area, which leads to a certain capacity limit, or if we develop several areas. And this is why for the high growth scenario, we have considered not only one, but all four sites that we discussed, Çanakkale, Marmara Sea, ranging from with average wind speeds from 7 to 8 meters per second in order to reach the high growth that we expect. What needs to happen on the regulatory and policy framework side? Well, we have a challenge. There is no full regulatory framework right now for offshore wind in Turkey. There is therefore the need to raise concern on the uncertainty related to the lack of legal framework in order to attract international investments especially. The solution is there. It means that there needs to be a potential focus areas to de-risk the regulatory framework. Turkey needs a streamlined framework for permitting processes by improving the coordinating role of central authorities and facilitate project developers in the permitting process. Turkey also needs to introduce specific requirements to site preparation and environmental social impact assessment that can eliminate the risk and uncertainties perceived by stakeholders. Turkey needs to specify the requirements necessary in the particular YEKA, supported by legal reforms and specific offshore wind regulation. It needs to detail the permitting process, including a list of all permits, authorities, and timelines that are necessary. In wrapping up, it needs to learn the lessons from the 2018 auction to ensure that the next auction is attractive and acceptable. A final look now that I want to present is on the levelized cost of energy. On these two growth scenarios, we are focused here on the high growth scenario, which you can see provides initially a higher LCOE, but this is because we will be using all of the areas available, no matter if the wind speed is higher or lower. The wind farms must also be developed in areas of lower wind speeds if we want to achieve a high growth. However, on the long term, we will see massive long-term cost reductions from 40 to 50% by 2050 compared to 2030. And in the end, also the high growth scenario will lead to lower LCOEs, as we have seen on this table. This has been a snapshot on our findings and our analysis for the offshore wind roadmap for Turkey. And now we are welcoming feedback from every one of you. This webinar presentation, including the appendices, will be accessed via Duret. It will be shared with all participants today, and we welcome feedback to World Bank or to COVI via the 2 emails that you will find on the presentation. The deadline for feedback is 2 weeks from today, on the 27th of January 2023. So what do we want to achieve with your feedback? We encourage all participants to provide feedback, as the opinions of all are valuable in finalizing and shaping this roadmap. So please provide your general views on the main findings of the offshore wind roadmap for Turkey via this presentation, and just let us know, are there findings that you strongly agree with? Are there findings that you strongly disagree with? And maybe are there any major issues or risks that you do not feel this roadmap may have covered? And do you have any other comments? We will appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much for listening in, and I now hand over back to our colleagues from World Bank.
Yasemin Hanım, hello again. I think dear Mark is not available.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. He had to attend another meeting, and
Okay.
he sends his apologies.
Okay, then instead of Mark, you can also make closing remarks before me if you want.
Yes, I think I would again thank everyone in attending this meeting, and we are looking forward to your views because both the government and World Bank Group, we really want to do this right from the beginning. So your views are so important, and it's the time to speak now. But we'll have more chances to discuss when we do the launch event for this roadmap. Then I think we'll be hopefully face to face in 2 months or so, and we'll have some presentations from the sector as well, and other studies ongoing in Turkey, and we'll get some more chances to discuss together. Thank you very much again, and thank you, Eric, for the presentation and the work as well.
Yes.
Murat Bey, to you as well and the association, this has been great, talking to you, working with you as well, and thanks for your facilitation of this event as well.
You all were welcome. And true to say, in 2 or 3 days, I am really grateful to all participants. 2 or 3 days time, more than 400 people attended. But I am so sorry that I promised 1,000 people. I am so sorry, I apologize. I could not fulfill my commitments. Yes, dear Eric, your comments are unbelievable. You prepared 3 different, scenario, and also you are right that for the supply chain, not only Turkey should be taken into account, but surrounding countries as well. I am always saying this. So I'm going to share presentation in my LinkedIn page, as you said, and in our web page, Duret web page. Okay, then we will wait the participants' comments in 2 weeks. Then, as you said, 2 months later, maybe we'll have big face-to-face in-person meeting. Thank you very much again to Ministry of Energy, to World Bank people, COVI people, and Duret people, and all the participants.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
great
much.
day. Have a nice weekend, and schönes Wochenende.
Schönes Wochenende. Have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.